عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله وصلى الله وسلم على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اهتدى بهديه إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد. The objective, inshallah, of today's lesson is to look at the concept of sects, groups, movements in Islam, and why they exist in the first place, whether their existence is problematic or beneficial and helpful, and how we should go about dealing with some of these things that relate to the issue of groups. First of all, as we've introduced a number of times before, Islam is the religion of Allah Ta'ala on this earth. And that Islam is the same Islam of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and the Islam of Ibrahim and Ismail and Ishaq and Musa and Isa and Adam and Nuh and other prophets. And the truth is one. And whenever Allah Ta'ala speaks about the truth, He refers to it in the singular. So does the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in the Ahadith. And whenever Allah Ta'ala speaks of falsehood, He speaks of them in the plural. وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا السُّبُلَ, and do not follow the paths. فَتَفَرَّقَ بِكُمْ عَنْ سَبِيلِهِ, His way. And the Prophet ﷺ, in the famous incident in which he drew lines, drew a path and drew different subul. And this refers to the clear, sound, foundational teachings of Islam. So the truth being one, and the truth not accepting any difference, relates to those things that are the clear main teachings of Islam. Not everything in life doesn't allow for scope in differing. Yeah? Some things in life, there has to be scope for differing, and different interpretation, different understandings, different views. And some things in life we can't accept different interpretations. Otherwise there would be no such thing as correct and incorrect, right and wrong. And truth would be purely subjective, which is false. Subjectivism and relativism is false. In fact, there's no such thing as subjectivism. There is no such thing. The claim of relativism, meaning the truth is relative. So you believe this, I believe this, both of us are right. Same with the concept of subjectivism. It's the same thing, similar concept. What you say, what you say, what you say, all of us are upon the truth. This doesn't exist, this idea, in reality. Because when you claim that subjectivism is true, I claim subjectivism isn't true. So automatically we have a clash. And so the idea of subjectivism, everything being valid, is impossible to accept. Because if you say I'm correct in my belief that relativism is false, then you've invalidated your argument. You've got nowhere to go except to either say I'm wrong and subjectivism exists, or we're going around in circles. So there is truth and falsehood. That's an important starting point. And even those who claim that truth is subjective and relative, they won't accept it when it comes from you. They will expect certain rules and principles. Just as the one who calls for freedom of thought and freedom of religion, freedom of belief, that's a symbol, purely a symbol. Because when it comes from you, your views aren't accepted. We call to freedom of belief, but you can't be a conservative Muslim, because that's a bit too much. We call to freedom of thought and freedom of religion, but if you're a strict fundamentalist Muslim, that's too much. They either accept everything or place some proper principles and guidelines to distinguish between what's true and what's false, what's valid and what's invalid. Islam has done that. is distinguish between those things which are fundamental truths and there's no scope for differing, and between those things where a person will be excused for having a different approach. And the Prophet ﷺ says in the famous hadith, إِذَا اجْتَهَدَ الْحَاكِمُ فَأَصَابَ فَلَهُ أَجْرًا. If a mujtahid, a hakim, a ruler, a judge, a mufti, a scholar, makes ijtihad, that's the first condition, takes the proper means to arrive at a conclusion, that's the condition. Not everyone who says an opinion will be rewarded. The Prophet ﷺ required two things, al-hakim and ijtahada. So that means he has to be qualified, to speak, and he has to have put in the proper steps in order to achieve that objective. إِذَا اجْتَهَدَ فَأَصَابَ فَلَهُ أَجْرًا. If he arrives at the truth, then he'll be rewarded twice. He'll have double the reward. وَإِنْ اجْتَهَدَ فَأَخْطَأَ فَلَهُ أَجْرٌ وَاحِدٌ. And if he makes ijtihad and makes a mistake, he will have a reward. He will have a reward. Even though he made a mistake, even though he got it wrong, even though he believes something that's incorrect, even though he's teaching other people something that's incorrect. And the Prophet ﷺ still said he will have a reward. Why? Because his incorrectness is not something that is going to dig or hit at the bulk and the foundations of Islam. Not a problem. These are things where scope can be given. Had it been a matter of Iman and Kufr, had it been a matter of Jahannam and Jannah, had it been a matter of guidance and misguidance, the Prophet ﷺ wouldn't have allowed so much scope and said, not a problem, he'll be rewarded for that. So that's a key starting point. That there are some things where the truth is one, and there are other things where there's scope for interpretation. There are lots of areas where there is a concept of true and false, but even the one who makes a mistake is excused, like we've just said now. And there are areas where the truth potentially could be more than one. Yeah? The truth can be more than one thing, so long as there is no direct clash between them. Because two contradictory things can't be both true. Two contradictory things can't both be true. Logically, that's a problem. And this is why the position of the vast majority of Imams of Ahl-Sunnah, including Malik and Abu Hanifa and others, is that the truth is one in furu', in secondary rulings. Yeah? In fiqhi issues that scholars disagree on. Yeah? Is Surah Al-Fatiha behind the Imam wajib? Is Surah Al-Fatiha wajib full stop? Is, for example, the tashahhud a fard or a wajib or a sunnah, etc.? These are different opinions, and the truth is one. The truth is one. Why does the truth have to be one? Because if you say both are true, that means you're saying two contradictory things are both true. And that's impossible. It is impossible for reading Fatiha behind the Imam to both be obligatory and not obligatory. That's impossible. But do we give scope for the difference? Yes, we give scope. It comes under the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. If the mujtahid makes ijtihad and he makes a mistake, he'll be rewarded, and whether he gets it, if he gets it correct, he'll be rewarded twice. Differing isn't just expected and a reality, it's obligatory. The way Allah created us necessitates that we disagree. You will never find someone agreeing with someone 100%. Never. That's pure imagination. People have to disagree. People disagree all the time. Doesn't matter how similar they are. It doesn't matter how similar they are. You will find someone, same family, same upbringing, same teachers, same environment, same everything, and they differ, they disagree. And so differing should not cause us to be irritated. Difference shouldn't cause us to be irritated. It should be something that we expect. It should be something that we appreciate has to happen. And we should respect other people's right to disagree, just as we want to disagree. I don't want to follow you in everything that you say. I have my own view. So give that person the right to have his view. If I propose and present my opinion, and I believe that the opinion and view that I'm proposing is a valid view, the least I expect from people is to respect that. So why is it that when someone else has a different view and has genuine reasons for believing that view or those views, why do I not give them the right to also disagree? This is a weakness sometimes found amongst Muslims, particularly amongst Muslims. A weakness in not accepting or allowing people to disagree. Sometimes for the fear of the religion being changed. And that's a noble intention, but it's incorrect. That method is incorrect. I'm so concerned, so worried that someone's going to change Islam or understand Islam incorrectly that I block off any scope for disagreeing or criticizing or critiquing or questioning. That's incorrect. Let people question. Let people disagree. Let people use their brains. Allah Ta'ala in the Quran criticized the disbelievers for rejecting faith and making their argument إِنَّا وَجَدْنَا آبَاءَنَا عَلَى أُمَّةٍ وَإِنَّا عَلَى آثَارِهِمْ مُقْتَدُونَ. We have found our forefathers upon this way, and we are going to be following their way. So he criticized blind taqleed in the Quran. Allah criticizes it. How can then Allah Ta'ala want us to follow Islam blindly? Allah has criticized following kufr blindly. Doesn't that mean that we are not supposed to follow our belief without we're supposed to follow it with thinking, understanding, contemplating, questioning? There's no need to worry about people being confused and people misunderstanding the deen, etc. Because if you're upon the truth, you'll be able to present the truth. And if somebody is not going to be guided to the truth, it doesn't matter what happens, you'll not convince them. You're not going to convince them. And this is why our role should simply be to understand the truth, to understand why it is the truth. That's step number one. If we're capable of presenting the truth and why this is the truth, alhamdulillah, jazakallah khair, you've done your job. Anything beyond that is not within our control. People accept, people reject, people believe, people disbelieve. That's beyond our control. Someone's sometimes so passionate about Islam that they want to force people to accept Islam. That's not going to happen. Doesn't matter how nice the arguments sound. As Imam Malik rahimahullah is reported to have said, when he was asked about someone who has knowledge of the Sunnah. Someone has knowledge of the Sunnah. أَفَيُجَادِلُ عَنْهَا? Should he be argumentative and debate in order to defend the Sunnah? قال لا. وَإِنَّمَا يُخْبِرُ بِهَا فَإِنْ قُبِلَتْ وَإِلَّا سَكَتْ. He should only explain it and teach it. If it is accepted, otherwise if it's not, he should remain silent. So difference is acceptable. Difference is natural. Difference is something that will certainly happen. We just need to reach a stage where we're capable of distinguishing between acceptable difference and difference which is problematic. Because also being too loose in accepting everything is problematic. Let people think, even if it's completely wrong, it's fine. Let people ask. Let people pose questions. Sometimes children and young people pose questions that are completely wrong, completely problematic. So, not a problem. Because we want to build in people the idea that that's fine, you can ask questions. You can ask questions and you can ponder and you can think and you can critique. And if what you have is true, then a young child will be convinced, not to worry. Now, when I hold an opinion to be true, and I'm convinced of that view, I've posed this question before, but I'll pose it again. What makes a person hold an opinion? What is it that makes me have an opinion? Why do I have this view? Okay, I believe that some evidence points towards this being the truth. Okay?
interpret it the way
You interpret?
you interpret it, how you understand it.
What do you mean? Why am I holding this view in the first place?
Because that's how you interpret the evidence.
Okay, so I believe that there is some evidence that point towards it and that the evidences mean this. Okay, what else?
Sometimes someone holds an opinion. It was the first thing that was taught to him about that.
Okay, this is what I've always known. Yeah, we've always known this. Okay. Yeah, your words are very nice, brother, but we've always been taught this. That's fine. That's a reason. Yeah.
Some just have an inclination towards an opinion.
Okay. Yeah. Someone poses amazing arguments, great arguments. I just don't feel comfortable that that's right. That happens. That happens. There's something in us that makes us feel that can't be true. Someone put 100 ahadith. That can't be true. Yeah. Sometimes experience. Personal experiences make me believe that no, this is wrong. This is wrong. Yeah, or this is right. Because I've been put in a certain situation which has led me to believe that. And so on. And so on. So these are different reasons to make a person believe that something is true or not true. Will we all have exactly the same experiences and views and education and convictions and evidences and interpret evidences the same way? Or are we going to differ in that? So naturally, not only are we going to differ in opinion, we are all going to be convinced that our view is correct. Because not only do I see things like this, I can't see what you're seeing. I can't see what you're seeing. What you're saying is true, what you're saying is correct. I don't understand where you're coming from. And if I understand where you're coming from to some extent, I still think there's something going wrong over there. It's not necessarily something's going wrong over there. Maybe something's going wrong here. Maybe something's going wrong here. And this is why that should be appreciated. We're only held to account for what we're capable of doing. So if I've done the best I can, that's all Allah holds me to account for. And as is famously quoted from Imam Shaykh, who said, قَوْلِي صَوَابٌ يَحْتَمِلُ الْخَطَأ. My view is the truth, but potentially incorrect or potentially mistaken. وَقَوْلُكَ خَطَأٌ يَحْتَمِلُ الصَّوَابِ. And your view is a mistake, but potentially true. Potentially true. Because maybe, I don't believe it, because otherwise I wouldn't have held this view, but maybe something's gone wrong in my method of thinking, which has led me to a mistake. Now, these differences, these different views, these different approaches existed at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. We've expanded on this more than once. We said at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, Sahaba disagreed on how to understand the Prophet's teachings. Even though he's with them, even though he's alive. Alive, not passed away, alive with them, still they disagreed. And generally speaking, the Prophet ﷺ didn't have a problem. Accepted that different disagreement. Accepted. Even though, like we said, the relied upon position is what? Is that the truth is one. Yani when the Prophet ﷺ said to the Sahaba, لا يصلين أحدكم إلا في بني قريظة, none of you should pray Asr until you get to Bani Qurayza. He definitely had one thing in mind. Can't have had more than one thing. Possibility, of course, he had more than one thing in mind, but the likely is that he had one thing in mind. So one group of the companions achieved what he had in mind. And one group didn't achieve exactly what he had in mind, but their interpretation is understandable, so he excused both. Sometimes this difference can turn into more than just different views, but it can turn into different groups. So we split up different views. You lot hold this view and you lot hold that view. As a starting point, is that a problem? Not a problem. You have this view, you have that view, no issue. But that can sometimes lead to two groups. We hold this view, so we're on the same team. And he holds that view. So there's a problem there. When does this development happen? When does disagreement turn into clash? Because not every disagreement is a clash. Husband and wife disagree, and they still might have the most loving relationship. So when does disagreement turn into a clash?
If they forget their main goal, the overlying.
Okay, forgetting what's more important, forgetting an overall goal, and making this bigger than it deserves. That's the first step. If we both believe that this is a small thing, we're not going to turn into two groups. We're not going to turn into a sect over two small things. If we disagree, what's better, bounty or Mars? Who says Mars? One. This is definitely the weaker opinion. The majority say bounty is better than Mars. We all agree that whether we prefer bounty or Mars, no one cares, that's a small thing. So are we ever going to turn this into a fight? No, I hope not. But when do things turn into a fight? If we both not just disagree, but we believe that our view is the one you have to adopt. And if you don't adopt this, there's a problem. You're going astray, you're going against God, you're going against the prophets. So when I make it a big thing, that's when things become problematic. And this is generally how things develop. This is how things become problematic. Now, did Islam allow people to be part of a group, to associate themselves with a group, a land, a tribe, a nation, a movement? Did Islam allow this? If so, how? Where? A lot of you are nodding, saying yes. But why? Where did Islam allow this? Yeah. That's one example. Muhajirin Ansar. Is that a valid example? Yes, it's a valid example. Why? Because Allah Ta'ala allowed them both to adopt names other than the name of Muslim. And He accepted that. In fact, He praised them in the Quran. وَالسَّابِقُونَ الْأَوَّلُونَ مِنَ الْمُهَاجِرِينَ وَالْأَنصَارِ. The first forerunners from the Muhajirin and the Ansar. وَالَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوهُمْ بِإِحْسَانٍ. And those who follow them rightly in their path. رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ. Allah is pleased with them. وَرَضُوا عَنْهُ. And they're pleased with Him. So they're being praised and referred to with names other than the name of Muslim. But when the Muhajirin and Ansar, or at least a small number of them, clashed over an issue which we mentioned before, what did the Prophet ﷺ say? قَالَ بِدَعْوَ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ. The call of ignorance. And in one narration, أَبِدَعْوَ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ وَأَنَا بَيْنَ أَظْهُرِكُمْ. The call of ignorance whilst I'm still amongst you. Because now the problem wasn't them using the term Muhajirin and Ansar. The problem was these terms, these labels, led to actions that were unacceptable in Islam. So the Prophet ﷺ called it Jahiliyyah. No group today has a more noble label than Muhajirin or Ansar. Because Allah praised Muhajirin and Ansar in the Quran. Allah didn't praise Sufiyya in the Quran. Allah didn't praise Salafiyya in the Quran. Allah didn't praise Ikhwan in the Quran. So therefore, none of these labels are more noble than the labels of Muhajirin and Ansar. And still the Prophet ﷺ considered it from the act of Jahiliyyah when these labels were misused. Similarly, it doesn't matter how nice the label sounds. It doesn't matter how nice the label sounds. If this label is being used to establish falsehood and practices that contradict the teachings of the Sharia, then it's from the practices of Jahiliyyah. Jahiliyyah. Give me whatever name you want, Jahiliyyah. And there's no problem saying that. Because the Prophet ﷺ called that which is more noble Jahiliyyah when it was misused. So, do we say the same thing about some of the groups that exist today? The existence of different groups, the existence of different movements, the existence of different denominations, if you want, Do we say similarly that these labels are not problematic, so long as they are within certain boundaries? What do we think?
Not problematic.
It's not
As
problematic.
long as they wouldn't have done like that.
Exactly the same. No difference between that and between Muhajirin, Ansar, etc.
Depends.
طبعا there are some differences, which is this is praised in the Quran and so on, but we're talking about a concept. There's a concept. طيب.
Depends what the origin of the label and what it stands for. Because
طيب.
Ansar is it seems to come from a concept of the action that they did.
جميل.
Whereas the other ones maybe don't.
Maybe, maybe not. طيب, fine. Yani, he said that the label of Muhajirin and Ansar stem from something noble, something that is approved in Islam. Yeah? That's the Hijrah, the Nusrah. These are two noble practices in Islam. So, okay, they're groups, but they're there due to a noble purpose. If the purpose is a false one, of course we're going to have a problem. I've established a group to reject the Sunnah. My group, this is not our group, it's based on rejecting Hadith. It's purely based on following the Quran. And anything to do with Hadith or something that's outside Hadith is rejected. We say the origin is problematic. So of course the label is problematic. But if it has a noble origin, we don't have that problem at least. Any other problem, potentially?
What it represents.
Type, okay.
So
But we've said that.
the origin might be noble, but what it might
What they stand for.
what it stands for now might be.
Okay. So have they continued that purpose? Have they continued fine? Is it still standing for a valid and noble message or not? Okay, let's say it has noble origin and it stands for a noble message. Any other problems?
Is it practiced?
Huh?
Is it practiced the way it originated?
Okay, so we have a noble starting point. What we stand for, what we're calling to, is noble and within the teachings of Islam. But we should also be practicing that properly, because having a name isn't sufficient. We want to see reality. Okay.
Can you have a situation where the origins are not noble,
Yeah.
but the actual practices are noble? So,
Like,
I can't come up with an example, but essentially the name of the origins, whatever the name, whatever the group is, people associate them to good things. So you're changing it just by the way they practice or do whatever. They may have a very strange name, but by that practice, that convinces the people around them that they're doing something that's right, and that will elevate.
so if we can think of an example, that would make things easier. So having an origin which is problematic, but with time it develops into something that is positive, good, encouraging, etc. But besides these things, if these conditions are fulfilled, does anyone still believe, and that's fine if you do, that any label is rejected? Of course, some people might argue, as a starting point, labels, groups, and so on are fine, but because of the problems they've caused in our time, we should reject them all. That's an argument some people have made. Okay, as a starting point, the idea of having a label, the idea of associating yourself, because association is a loose thing that we accept generally. I'm from this tribe, I'm from that city, I'm from that country. These are associations. We accept those associations. So the concept of association is not a problem. But maybe because the malpractice of these associations, someone might have a problem and say all associations should be rejected.
Some names given by other people to groups rather than originating from the group themselves.
Maybe. And this is why we have to distinguish between an actual movement and a view held by some people. A movement and a view held by some people. And in some groups that are referred to as groups, it's not a group. It's not a group. It's just that someone who doesn't like that person, or some of those people, has put a label on them, and then it's sort of And this happens historically as well. When we hear of a group, and when the scholars of Aqidah talk about, for example, al-Mushabbiha, qalat al-Mushabbiha. Who's al-Mushabbiha? There's no group called al-Mushabbiha. They didn't have a leader called someone who had this type of name, or someone who encouraged people to do tashbih. How is tashbih interpreted, translated? Yeah, it is. Anthropomorphism. Yeah, to resemble Allah's attributes to creation. That's not a group. That's not a sect. That's not a movement. But it's an idea. So we're under the impression that this idea was held by some sort of movement or group. And in other cases, it was a movement. It was a group. It was a person who started things off. He had followers. He had supporters, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Wallahi, if one of you can ask Ustad Abu Walid to kindly delay that would be appreciated. Otherwise we're going to be distracted for the next half an hour. Yeah, tafadhal. It's asking about the label of Ahl Hadith being used. Labels. And this is the point that I want to come to. That labels in and of themselves have had uses. Sometimes they have reasons for coming about. Sometimes they do help in distinguishing. And it's not a big problem. It's not a big problem so long as this thing is not made as an end. It's the goal. The goal is this. The goal is this group. The goal is this madhab. The goal is this scholar. These are means. These are means. The Quran and Sunnah does not talk about labels. Only thing mentioned is Islam, Muslim. Only thing. All other labels came later on. Even the label of Ahl Sunnah. Even the label of Ahl Sunnah is not in the Quran. It's not in the Sunnah, and it wasn't known at the time of the Sahaba. The label of Ahl Sunnah was not known at the time of the Sahaba. And what's reported from Ibn Abbas عنه, using the term Ahl Sunnah is weak. At the time of the Tabi'in, perhaps, this label of Ahl Sunnah came to be known. طبعا, the word Sunnah exists. No one should say that the word Sunnah exists in the Quran, therefore this justifies my group. And it proves that what I'm following is the truth. Not necessarily. Because Allah also talks about the Quran. And when someone calls himself a Quranist, it doesn't mean he's upon the truth. Even though the Quran is the word of Allah. So the fact that a label is found in the Quran or Sunnah doesn't justify the validity. In reality, people will definitely have different takes on this and different views. I will pose what I think is most in line with Islamic teachings on this issue. And that's the labels and names and groups can sometimes act as a form of encouragement. So when you associate yourself to Ahl al-Hadith, for example, that is a natural encouragement to study Hadith, to learn Hadith, to practice Hadith, and so on. It has its use. Particularly when you know that many of the early scholars used the label of Ahl al-Hadith. People like Ahmad and Ishaq and Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Qattan and Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, Ali ibn al-Madini, Bukhari, others, they used the label of Ahl al-Hadith. And so when you follow in that type of footsteps, it has its sort of encouragements and benefits. Not a big problem. Not a big problem. What about the term of tasawwuf? I attribute myself to Sufism, tasawwuf. Can that act as a form of encouragement? In what way? Careful what you're saying. People are listening to you.
Depends what he sees Sufiya as.
If you were to ask a Sufi, person who says, I'm mutasawwif, I'm a follower of Sufism, if you were to ask him, what's Sufism about, what do you think he'd say? Because there's no point asking a Salafi, what's Sufism, brother?
He could say
that's injustice.
He could say it's tasfiyat al-nafs.
It's about purifying one's soul, purifying one's heart, maybe dhikr, emphasis on dhikr. Does anyone disagree with these concepts? So it can act as a form of encouragement. It can. It can act as a form of encouragement. Some of the key pillars of tasawwuf is what? Is having a shaykh and having a certain program, maybe that you go by with the shaykh, certain adhkar, certain awrad, various things like that, and so on. The idea can be a form of encouragement. It can help people to take their religion seriously. طيب جماعة التبليغ. جماعة التبليغ similarly. No, what we said about tasawwuf and al-hadith and so on, we can say the same thing about Jama'at al-Tabligh. The concept of being someone who feels responsible for helping other Muslims and encouraging other Muslims and giving da'wah and encouraging people to attend the masjid and doing this and doing that. These positive meanings all exist. The problem is what? The problem is when we look at another movement or group, we ignore all these things. We ignore the positives that we agree with. And we focus on one or two things that maybe we think are negative. They could be negative, they might not be negative, but you think they're negative. And at the same time, we turn something which was supposed to help us in a path towards Allah and in a path towards following the prophets and the Prophet ﷺ, we turn that into sectarianism and fanaticism, ta'assub. Everything is about the group now. Everything is about this movement. So if he's not telling the truth, I don't care, so long as he's from our group. And if he's being unjust, I don't care, so long as he's one of us. And I will make a million excuses for him because he's one of us. And I won't make a single excuse for you because you're one of them. That's jahili. That's jahili. Really, we should be establishing, is this person a Muslim? If the answer is yes, he's one of us. He's one of us. This meaning, for some people, is so difficult to accept. So difficult to accept, even though it is qat'i. What does qat'i mean? Qat'i means that there is no doubt about this meaning in the Quran and Sunnah. It is a qat'i ruling that you have to treat your Muslim brother as your brother. Al-Muslimu akhul Muslim. The Muslim is the brother of another Muslim. So we leave that which is a clear-cut teaching in the Quran. And Allah Ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ. Believers are nothing but brothers. فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَ أَخَوَيْكُمْ. Reconcile, do good between your brothers. And the Messenger ﷺ says, الْمُسْلِمُ أَخُو الْمُسْلِمُ. The Muslim is the brother of another Muslim. Some people, it's so difficult for them to accept that another Muslim is your brother. He's one of you. We're on the same team. We have the same objective. Too difficult. Because the barriers that we've put between ourselves and other Muslims are so many. And we've magnified them to an extent where these barriers are made to be the most important thing. You find someone believes in the Quran and believes in following the teachings of the Quran. Believes in the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ and does his best to follow those teachings. Believes in following Islam the way the Sahaba radiallahu anhum followed Islam. What more do we want? These three principles, how much agreement is that going to lead to? So much agreement. That means our salah is the same, our zakah is the same, our hajj is the same, our sadaqah is the same, our iman is the same. We believe in Allah, we believe in the akhirah, we believe in the angels, we believe in the prophets. The things that we agree to are the same. So we're all agreeing on the pillars of iman and the foundations of Islam. And we all agree on the evil of kufr and shirk and major sins. How much more agreement do we need? We want to be twins? That's sufficient agreement. That's sufficient agreement for someone to say that we are part of one team, working towards the same things. The differences that exist between various groups who have these principles. Groups that don't have these starting points, that's another discussion. That's another discussion. A group that does not accept as a starting point that the teachings of the Prophet are things that we should follow. Here we have a big problem, because the difference now isn't just a small thing. The difference is about the obligation of following the Messenger. Okay? But we are talking about the mainstream groups that exist in the Muslim world. Can we safely say that the majority of mainstream Muslim groups have the aim of following the Sunnah? There's no hesitation about that. They have the aim. No hesitation. There's no hesitation about that whatsoever. Does that mean that ultimately they should be part of one team working together? Yes, of course. That shouldn't be a heavy thing to say. That shouldn't be a heavy thing to say, because that's the truth. If this is the case as a principle, then what then of a case where Muslims are a minority, Muslims are weak, Muslims are being shot at from all angles, and sectarianism and ta'assub has only created worse and worse situations for the Muslims? Shouldn't that be more of a reason for people to come together and Muslims to be seeing the sides of agreement instead of disagreement? We have to, as much as possible, instill in ourselves the ability to say, I don't accept this view, but I see where you're coming from. Is that hard? I don't accept that view. I believe it's incorrect. In fact, I believe that might be a problematic view, very problematic. But I see where you're coming from. Okay? Alhamdulillah. That's fine. It's not the end of the world. It doesn't have to be a case of follow my view or we're never speaking again. And this is an issue. The movements of today, various groups and sects of today, all of them claim to be the purest form of Islam. Every group claims to be the purest form of Islam. But it's amani. Inhum illa yadhunnun. No doubt. Inhum illa yadhunnun. Because every group will say, we're the ones who are concerned with following the Sunnah, and we are the ones who have an encompassing understanding of Islam. In reality, each movement, each group is only fulfilling a role. It's a human effort. If you think your movement is perfect, then there's no difference between you and the Prophet. If you believe that your group is perfect in following Islam, there's no difference between the Prophet and you and your group. So Allah Ta'ala could have sent another messenger, didn't need to send another messenger because we have you, which is not true. Groups and movements are human efforts. Human efforts to understanding the deen as much as in the best way possible. There are strengths and there are weaknesses. Naturally, we emphasize things more than other things. Human beings are like that. We're like that. We emphasize things that we feel are really important. And another person emphasizes things they feel are really important. It's very difficult to be encompassing and do things perfectly. Very difficult. And if we look at different Muslim groups as completing one another, we will think that there is a lot of good in the Ummah. If we view all Muslim groups and movements and even institutes, disputes have trickled down to just institute, masjid versus masjid. Masjid versus masjid. This masjid doesn't like that masjid. On the minbar, this masjid is attacking that masjid by name. So when I say groups and movements, I'm talking as down to that level even. If we view these different Muslim groups as competing against one another and fighting against one another, we will lose hope in Islam and the Muslims. Because we will think that everyone is just at one another. On the other hand, if we view things as being everyone is doing their bit, Jazakallahu khairan, and I'm going to do my bit as well, you will feel much more optimistic. We'll feel much more at ease, much more content, much more relaxed, and we will have husn al-dhan of our Muslim brothers. We will think well of each other instead of thinking badly of each other. Sectarianism, ta'assub, is a disaster. I believe it's the worst disease this ummah has been struck with. The worst disease. Sectarianism. Because you make your sect above Islam. You do. No one says so verbally. No one says, I believe tasawwuf is more important than the Quran and Sunnah. No one says that. No one in the world says that. But our actions can sometimes indicate that. Our actions can indicate that. Now, when we look at the various groups as all fulfilling a role, we'll find that that's the truth as well. When we think of the Salafi da'wah, the Salafi movement, for example, and I have no problem. In this open class, I will talk about groups and sects and movements and attack and criticize, no problem. And I still love all the Muslim movements, even though I criticize them from top to toe. When I think of the Salafi movement, what do I think of the emphasis being? Following Salaf. Don't sit with Ahl Bid'ah. That comes first, yeah. Following Quran, Sunnah, Tayyib, what else? These answers mean that there are too many Salafis in this circle. We need more critical analysis. Tabdi'. Tayyib, maybe declaring another person to be the concept of bid'ah. Even if not tabdi', the concept of bid'ah is more emphasized in the Salafi movement than amongst the Sufis, for example. You'll rarely hear the word bid'ah being used in Sufi circles. In Salafi circles, that's a regular discussion. Regular discussion. If I think of Sufism, what type of focus, emphasis do I think of? Dhikr, Tazkiyah, Wird, okay, a portion of the dhikr. Being quiet. Seclusion, okay. No one thinks bid'ah. دخول الكهف. طيب ما شاء الله. Going into caves. Okay. Yeah. Maybe salah upon the Prophet ﷺ. Okay. Hatred of Salafis. These are all things that maybe are associated with. طيب, there's an element here. حزب التحرير. خلافة. خلاص. Next answer, خلافة. حزب التحرير focus on خلافة. طيب. جماعة التبليغ. خلافة. دعوة. طيب. The Muslim Brotherhood. Unity. طيب, that's a big emphasis. Politics. طيب, big association as well. The point is, every group, although it claims to be the complete following of Islam, in reality, it's emphasizing one side more than another. And that's not a problem. And that doesn't mean that you'll not have a natural inclination towards this group or that group. The reality is that we make excuses for our associations more than others. So if you spoke to a Sufi, for example, and you said to him, look at what the Sufis today are doing, he'll say, that's fine, I agree with you, but I'm not that type of Sufi. I'm not that type of Sufi. I follow this type of Sufism. And if you said to a Salafi, look at what the Salafi is saying and doing, he said, that's fine, but I don't agree with that. Yeah, I follow this. So we make excuses for our association. Yeah, I believe my association is the true one. It's, okay, I accept that these movements are okay, they're doing their job, but my movement is the best. Not a problem. Everyone has their inclination. But what's more important today, with the objective of these words that I'm talking about, that I'm speaking, the objective is to realize that people who have these key starting points, these key premises, They're Muslim, and their aim is to follow Islam properly. Correct, incorrect, separate discussion. Separate discussion. The best way, not the best way, separate discussion. But there needs to be some respect, there needs to be an acceptance, and there needs to be prioritizing the qat'i over the dhanni. Because at the end of the day, when you believe that 90% of Sufis today are upon bid'ah, that's ijtihad. Quran didn't tell you that. No revelation told you 90% of the Sufis are upon bid'ah. That's your ijtihad. Could be true, could be untrue. But when Allah says the Muslim is the brother of another Muslim, or the believers are nothing but brothers, that's not ijtihad, that's qat'i. So we have to prioritize that which is qat'i over that which is ijtihad, that which is dhanni. And that's an important starting point. And I assure you, when you sit with a respectable person from the various groups, you're thinking, oh, what? We're basically the same. Really? The difference is not as severe as we think. The difference is not as severe as we think. I said to some of the brothers at the Masjid Iman Center, I said to them, I've listened to some Sufi speaking, I thought he was a Salafi. Because at the end of the day, the Sufi is going to quote what? The Bible, Quran, Hadith, the words of the scholars, Ahmad, Bukhari, Muslim. He's going to quote Malik, he's going to quote Abu Hanifa, etc. So of course there's going to be similarity. Of course you will find areas where you feel uncomfortable. You feel uncomfortable. Don't feel too comfortable. طيب, and that's fine. That doesn't have to be a reason to turn the world upside down. The statement of the Prophet ﷺ, the Jews separated into 71 groups. افترقت اليهود على 71 فرقة وافترقت النصارى على 72 فرقة, and the Christians separated into 72 groups. وتفترق هذه الأمة إلى 73 فرقة, and this ummah will separate into 73 sects. كلها في النار, all of them in the fire, إلا واحدة, except one. Firstly, this hadith is a matter of difference between the scholars in terms of authenticity. Whether it is authentic hadith or not is a matter of khilaf. Abu Muhammad ibn Hazm was from those who questioned the authenticity of this hadith, particularly the second part of the hadith, which is the statement of all of them in the fire except one. In fact, Abu Muhammad ibn Hazm says this addition is fabricated, mawdu'. Imagine Ibn Hazm says mawdu', and some people have made this the deen of Islam. كلها في النار إلا واحدة. This hadith is not reported by Bukhari, and it's not reported by Muslim, nor is it reported by Malik in his Muwatta. That doesn't mean necessarily it's a weak hadith. A hadith that's not in Bukhari or Muslim or the Muwatta doesn't necessarily mean it's weak. But it does indicate something. What does it indicate? It indicates that it's not the strongest of the hadith. It indicates that it's not from the strongest of the hadith, because the condition of Al-Bukhari and Muslim is stricter than the condition of Ibn Khuzaymah, for example. And this is explicit in the words of Al-Bukhari and Muslim. Muslim says, rahimahullah ta'ala, I haven't put in this every hadith as sahih. I haven't put in this book every hadith as sahih. So a hadith not being in Al-Bukhari and Muslim does not mean it's weak, but it indicates something. Al-Hafidh ibn Rajab says this. Al-Hafidh ibn Rajab says this. He says that very few ahadith are authentic, very few ahadith outside of Bukhari and Muslim exist, except that they have some sort of illah, some sort of defect, which caused Al-Bukhari or Muslim or both to leave the hadith out. So that's an important point. So that we don't make this hadith like the Quran. We don't make this hadith like the Quran. Why is that the case? Because had this been such a fundamental part of the deen, then it would have been transmitted generation to generation. The Sahaba, the Tabi'een, everyone would be transmitting this, and it would be in the most important books of the Sunnah. The fact that it isn't shows something. What do we understand when we hear this type of hadith? What comes into mind? What comes into the mind of a lot of people is that the majority of the Muslims are in the hellfire. Yeah? This ummah is going to be split up into 73 groups, sects, all of them in the fire except one. The first thing that comes to mind is, that means, and we have this whole ummah, everyone's in Jahannam except one out of every 73. Which is false. Incorrect. In fact, is it acceptable to believe that this one group, assuming the hadith is authentic, and it has been authenticated by a number of scholars, like Abu Abdullah al-Hakim, and before him At-Tirmidhi, and he seems to consider it an acceptable hadith as well, and others. Assuming this hadith is authentic, let's say it's authentic. Is it valid, is it a valid understanding to believe or to interpret it as meaning the vast majority of the Muslims are upon guidance, and these many small little groups that the Prophet ﷺ spoke of being misguided are only a small number? Is that a potential correct understanding? It is the correct understanding. Because the principle of ijtihad and istinbat is to do radd of the mutashabih ila al-muhkam. So those ahadith and verses that are mutashabih, they could be understood in more than one different way. They have to be returned back to the muhkam, that which is clear. That which is clear. And that which is clear is that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man salla salatana, wastaqbala qiblatana, wa akala dhabihatana, fahuwa al-Muslim." The one who prays our salah and faces our qibla and eats our dhabiha. That's a refutation of veganism. And eats our slaughter. فَهُوَ الْمُسْلِمُ. He is the Muslim. He has the rights of the Muslim and the obligations of the Muslim. قطعي. The Prophet ﷺ was asked about the 5 pillars of Islam. And in the end, the Prophet ﷺ told him about Salah and Zakah and Sawm and Hajj. And said, if he's truthful in following these 5 pillars, لا يدخلن الجنة. He will enter Jannah. There you go. He will enter Jannah. The one who practices these pillars of Islam will enter Jannah. And in another narration he said, أفلح الله إن صدق. By Allah he's successful if he's truthful. Truthful to what? Praying 5 times a day, giving zakat if you fulfill the condition, performing hajj if you fulfill the condition, and fasting if you fulfill the condition. This is muhkam. These ahadith are muhkam. You will find them as a hadith mutawatir. Ahadith mutawatir. And forget the definition of tawatur that some people have made almost impossible to achieve. Mutawatir. Mutawatir because it is something that every person knows, transmitted from the Prophet ﷺ to the Sahaba, to the Tabi'een, down every generation. Every book of hadith mentions these ahadith. So how can we put these ahadith to the side and make this hadith the asl? Make this the core? Make this the foundation? La, instead what we do, these types of ahadith, we return them back to the muhkam and say, how should we understand it in light of those evidences which are clear? And if we do that, we will conclude, as Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala concludes, that this hadith is referring to these many different groups being small groups. Now, that's not my interpretation. It's not my interpretation. Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah explicitly says this. He says that the jama'ah, because in another narration the hadith says, all of them in the fire except one. وَهُمُ الْجَمَاعَةِ. Reported by Abu Dawud and others. It is the jama'ah. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala says this means that the vast majority of scholars are the jama'ah. The bulk of the Muslims. The vast majority of the Muslims. And the astray groups are only a small number. And we're talking about those who have gone astray on major issues. Like we spoke about, rejecting the Sunnah, rejecting one of the pillars of Iman, rejecting some of the pillars of Islam, allowing the kaba'ir, these types of things. These things that are clear things that take a person outside of the Sunnah. Besides that, the person is a Muslim, more than just a Muslim, upon the Sunnah. Upon the Sunnah. But again, that's hard for a lot of us to take, to say that the majority of Muslims are upon the Sunnah. Yeah, the majority of Muslims are upon the Sunnah. Alhamdulillah, is that something to be happy about, to be sad about? To be happy about? Why do we want to tighten the circle? We want to widen the circle. With proof. And the default is that you widen the circle. If someone says, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, he's in the da'wah of Islam. You don't take them, it is haram. Not just, you shouldn't, it is haram to take them out of Islam. Or even to take them out of the circle of Sunnah. Except with a clear-cut proof as clear as the sun. طبعا. If it is prohibited to curse another Muslim, or to say something that upsets him, to speak behind his back, and these things are sinful and not allowed, how can it be allowed to say you're an innovator, you're not follower of the Sunnah? Of course you can't say that. Of course you can't say that unless you have a proof that's as clear as the sun. So this hadith, which has caused a lot of conflict, unfortunately, it's caused a lot of Muslims to be confused about their religion. It's caused a lot of Muslims to spend years trying to look into different sects and groups to see which one I should follow. And I've heard some people say this to me. Say, this hadith is there. That means one of these groups must be the true one. Who told you the Prophet is talking about the Brahmanis and the Deobandis and Ikhwanis and so on? Who told you these are the groups the Prophet is referring to? Is it possible that that's what the Prophet is referring to? Is it possible? Is it possible that when the Prophet ﷺ made these statements, he was referring to Deobandis, Brahmanis, this lot, that lot, this lot, that lot? Is it possible? Impossible. Impossible. Why is it impossible? Because the number of these groups are hundreds. They come in the hundreds. If you count just the groups of today, they're in the hundreds. Let alone the groups that have been around from the time of the Prophet until today. And every group has a subgroup, and every group has a subgroup, and the subgroup has a subgroup. And so therefore these ahadith are there, and they are to be treated like the ahadith of the unseen. Like the ahadith that talk about the signs of the Day of Judgment. They're there to give us some guidance on what to do and what not to do, but they are not there to tell us go and find the exact details. These ahadith are to be taken as they come, if they're authentic and sound, and they're there to give us a warning or a teaching, but to apply them to specific scenarios requires clear-cut proof, and you won't find it until Yawm al-Qiyamah, those clear-cut proofs. So therefore, this idea of having to follow the different groups and see which one's upon the truth and see which one's not, there's no need. Save yourself the energy. Save yourself the effort. Follow that which is a clear part of the deen. Follow that which is a clear part of the deen. That which we all know is Islam, the pillars of Islam, the pillars of Iman, the things that are fard, the things that are sunnah, the things that we know are major sins. We keep away from those things. And your Islam is perfect. Perfect, complete. And the differences that exist, that cause controversy, are usually differences that do not have much of an impact, nor are they differences that lead to severe consequences in the akhirah. And I would expand more on that point, lakin that's a summary of that issue. And with this being a controversial maybe summary or statement, I've got no problem at all. Because the ibrah is with sound, correct understanding. Not to say, inna wajadna aba'na ala ummah, or to say, this is what we've always known. This is what we've always known. This is what we've always known is not a dalil. I know we've gone right up to Iqamah time. Like, if somebody has a comment, Jazakallah khair, then you're welcome to bring that up now. Tfadal.
What's the correct opinion to have about the Shia?
Firstly, the Shia are different groups. The questions about the Shia. The Shia are different groups. and even the Shia have developed over history. And I would say that it is better to criticize beliefs than to criticize groups. طبعا, when a belief becomes widespread in a group, then that whole group becomes problematic. When it becomes the norm to have a dislike for the Sahaba, for instance, then the whole group becomes problematic, because this is one of your principles. Even then, it is more just and it is more accurate to criticize values, to say that the one who curses the companions or the one who speaks ill of the companions, as the Prophet ﷺ says, as Ahmad ibn Hanbal says, مَا أَرَاهُ عَلَى الْإِسْلَامِ, I can't see him being upon Islam. And to criticize certain practices of shirk known to exist amongst some of the Shia. It is more accurate to criticize those practices and those beliefs, because doing so is enough. Doing so is enough. And we briefly touched upon it on last week when we spoke about takfir. Some people think, no, you have to attack a group. Really, it's not always a need. Sometimes it is needed. Not always though. And it is sufficient to attack an idea, to invalidate a view. Otherwise it's a shaky and a big topic, the topic of the Shia. Lakin there are definitely problems there.
Sister's got a question.
We respect our Muslim brother and give them their rights, but some of the groups you mentioned have huge mistakes in Iman, Sufis, Wujud, so how can we not speak and explain these mistakes? Jazakallah khair. That's exactly what you should do. Explain the mistakes. As opposed to, first of all, the belief in Wahdat al-Wujud is a belief held by some of the followers of Sufism, and not all. And secondly, that's all we want. That's all we're requesting. We're requesting criticize some of those values, criticize some of the ideas, as opposed to criticizing a movement as a whole. The reason for that is that when you're constantly attacking, as some mashayikh unfortunately have done, constantly attacking a group, you've created a massive wall between Muslims. One group of Muslims on this side and one group of Muslims on that side. Had we restricted disagreement to discussing issues, your view is batil, your view is false, your view is incorrect, your view contradicts these verses and these hadith, that's fine. Why is it so hard to do that? Instead of to constantly dig at groups, names, they believe this, they believe this, they believe that, they're this, they're that. The Sufis don't stop speaking about the Wahhabiyya, and the Salafis don't stop speaking about the Sufiyya. Critique concepts, critique views, values, with evidences. That's it. Otherwise, what ends up happening is that our concern is no longer the truth. Our concern is you. I'm going to go after you. And me, I'm going to go after you. And my aim is to take you down. And my aim is to take you down. What's this? And so, therefore, I'm not saying don't criticize. I'm not saying every group that I've mentioned today has 100% perfection. We're human beings. We don't have perfection, nor does anyone who associates themselves to a group. But the point is, we criticize concepts. Criticize concepts. And what we say about some groups, other groups are similar. Other groups are similar. Some people think it's just the Salafis who are constantly attacking everyone. It's not just the Salafis. Abad. I've seen and mixed and sat and spent time with some of the Sufiyya, same thing. Same thing, Salafis. No different in attacking and going after different groups. Attack ideas, concepts. Be reasonable, be academic, be objective. That's it. So if you don't like that view based on knowledge, not based on taqleed, if you don't like an opinion based on knowledge, critique that opinion. But don't constantly attribute to groups, especially when that same group doesn't all agree to holding a certain view.
Why does it have to be necessarily a contradiction for a person who believes that hadith about 72 seconds? Meaning that the majority of the Muslims because they follow sects, are a part of one of these sects, and therefore go into the hellfire. And at the same time, that the Muslim, if he's a Muslim, follows the 5 pillars, he's going to Jannah. When eventually, even if a Muslim is
Says La ilaha illallah.
yes, who goes to is punished, in the hellfire, eventually enters Jannah anyway.
No, the Prophet ﷺ says, أَفْلَحَ وَاللَّهِ. By Allah, he's successful. About the person who sticks to the basics of Islam. To say to me he's going to be spending hundreds and thousands of years in Jahannam and afterwards enter Jannah, that success is very partial success. That success is partial success. And the Prophet ﷺ says about those who will enter Jannah, بِغَيْرِ عَذَابٍ وَلَا حِسَابٍ. No questioning, no punishment. And he only mentioned a handful of traits, all revolving around tawakkul, reliance upon Allah Ta'ala. These things are clear-cut, muhkam. We don't make these equal evidences and then strike this daleel with that daleel. This one has to be understood in light of that one. This one comes first. That which is authentic and sound comes first. And then we look at what comes next and see how to interpret it in light of these. And on top of that, the assumption